All right, so bear with me as I adjust here a little bit. Um, I appreciate everyone's patience as we're just going to make a next jump. I'm going to check our itinerary, and so we have a video that I'm going to share a screen for. This is Faith and her mom, a mother and daughter account of medical harm and the impact on the family. And I'm going to jump over to um, our bios so that I can introduce. Faith is a young woman in Ontario who was fast tracked into transgender medicalization as a vulnerable high school student. Uh, she, like many, had significant mental health issues at the time and did her own research after, um, kind of being forcefully and fast tracked to puberty blockers and synthetic hormones. And at a certain point, she recognized that she'd been misled and medically mistreated, leading to her detransition. Faith has made a commitment to raise awareness and to do whatever she can to save other young people from what she went through. Uh, Amy, Faith's mom, is also recovering from the trauma and the impact on family of social and medical transition. And as a mom who was told that her child would take her life if she didn't comply with the entire process, Amy understands the hand her parents were dealt when their children take on a transgender identity, and she's hopeful that her experiences will help others going through this. So I'm going to share my screen here and uh, and start the video. I will keep an eye on the chat and questions as we go, and keep in mind that this is a recording, so um, we won't be able to ask Amy and Faith questions directly. Here we go.
Hello, my name is Amy Grollo, and I live with my now adult daughter about 60 kilometers from Toronto, Ontario. Thank you for the opportunity, Jay, to speak with your listeners as a mom of a young adult who has been through a roller coaster ride of her life. Like every parent to be, I read What to Expect when You're Expecting. But to my knowledge, there have been no book to prepare me for surviving my teenager's transition from female to male and back again. My child was named Faith at birth. As a child, she would ask to wear boys' clothes because they were more comfortable than the form-fitting girls' clothing. She played around with the boys at school and roughhoused with them. She didn't like to get caught up in the drama of pre-adolescent girls. She often remarked that she thought she should have been a boy, but I said that she was probably more like a tomboy, and that satisfied her. So relief washed over me. As a tween, my marriage to Faith's father failed. After he left, I thought it would be easier navigating through life with just Faith and me. I couldn't have been more wrong or disillusioned. Any parent of most teenagers knows the mood swings, rebellious attitudes, and the silent treatment. The more I questioned Faith as to what was wrong, what I may have said or done, or even simply ask how her day was, the more monosyllabic the responses would be. Nothing, fine, whatever, were standard answers. I started trying to determine where I was failing my daughter, but still kept my own busy schedule and attempted to be a good parent. I did start watching for other signs of concerns with Faith. Her school marks started to decline. She had little to no appetite. Smoking and marijuana habits began to form. She isolated in her room or hung out with her new friends she had made at high school. So what was so unusual with my teenager versus any other? Faith was suffering silently. In fact, she had many reasons to do so. Several years later, I now know some of those reasons. March 2015, Faith wanted a new style of haircut. I was silently shocked when it was buzzed on both sides with a mop-like top. It's only hair, as I tried to convince myself, but some of the friends she had, I was wondering if she was not straight and was trying to ease me into the new her as a lesbian. I thought I was doing the best I could to provide support to Faith as a single working mom. But in hindsight, I think I busied myself to avoid or distract from reality. Clothing styles began to change, and the feminine wardrobe was being replaced with more masculine clothing. June of 2015, Faith dropped the proverbial bombshell and told me that no, she wasn't a gay girl, but was rather transitioning from female to male and was transgender. Several months beforehand, at the recommendation of our family physician, Faith had been attending counseling sessions. And let me tell you, I was ready to tear strips off any of the adults involved with planting those seeds in my daughter's head. But then I took a step back to let my thoughts accumulate. Faith is very curious and researches everything. So I figured she had come up with this idea on her own and likely discussed it during her appointments. My first reactions, admittedly, were not favorable, positive, or helpful to Faith, who was now to be called Alexander, Alex, or Lex. Even these years later, I still live with regret, remorse, and guilt over the way I handled things in 2015. It took me many months to get used to calling him by his preferred name. I would deliberately call him his dead name, but it was really hard to get used to. Several months later, Alex had suicidal thoughts, and so I took him immediately upon his request to our local hospital. After waiting through the night to see a mental health specialist and learning one wasn't available for teens, the ER physician told me that he was going to send Alex home with an anti-anxiety medication. Should he ever experience this again, we were to go to another city, to the Children's Hospital for treatment. Hope against hope that would never be necessary, but 3 months later, we made the 40-kilometer trek late at night to get some help. I thought I knew enough to not push Alex by asking too many questions and aggravating the situation further. This visit resulted in an overnight admission to hospital. The hospital staff seemed to take all necessary precautions to ensure his safety. When I left, I felt so empty, alone, and a failure to my son. The doctor called me the next morning to pick up Alex and advised me when I arrived that appointments would be made for Alex for follow-up. I guess I was in a fog because I was to understand it was to get help for the mental health issues. But in fact, the doctor was a gender therapist who had gender identity clinics at the same hospital. It took 3 months for the first appointment. I drove Alex to all of his appointments, booking vacation or working overtime at work to compensate for these many appointments. But this was my kid who was suffering. Let's get the necessary help so that he can survive. Please keep in mind, however, that I was not yet fully supportive of Alex's decision to become a male and was still emotionally distant from him. Although he had many visits with the specialist and members of the clinic's team, I sat in the waiting room and was not always privy to their discussions. By now, I knew that if I wanted answers to my many questions, some I asked and some I didn't, I'd have to wait for Alex's timing to share information with me, or not. At times, I'd ask pointed questions like, is there anything you want to share from your appointment? Anything you'd like to tell me about the visit? And if I got something other than, no, I don't think so, I tried to suppress my excitement at being let in. However, in May 2017, Alex met with the specialist and the endocrinologist because the team had decided to move forward in Alex's treatment and start him on puberty hormone blockers. I was invited into the appointment for the last few minutes. The endocrinologist explained the very basics of what this entailed and asked if I had questions. Of course I did, but truly didn't know what to ask without upsetting Alex. I recall asking if the procedure could be reversed if Alex should ever happen to change his mind in the future. I asked what the long-term effects would be. I asked if the procedure was safe. I was told that up to a certain point, the process could be reversed, but there was no explanation offered regarding the physical, psychological, physiological, or emotional changes Alex might experience. As for long-term effects, he might have to take calcium supplements to provide strength to his bones. And safety, there wasn't any evidence that this was any more harmful than other things, heart attacks, cancer, that sort of thing. I was not convinced that this was the right path for my child, but hey, I was only the parent. These were the well-educated medical professionals who knew what they were doing. They knew I was not pleased with this decision, but the doctor asked if I'd rather have a dead daughter from suicide or have a happy surviving son. Alex had already signed the consent to treat form to start the hormone blockers and subsequent T-shots, which I later learned was short form for testosterone. The endocrinologist then handed me the form on a clipboard and said, "Now, Mom, you're welcome to sign the form, but it's not necessary. I'm offering it to you only as a courtesy. With so much angst, anger, anxiety, frustration, sadness, and distance growing in my relationship with my only child, what choice did I really truly have but to sign in a show of solidarity and support? I clearly remember leaving that appointment trying to hide my great disappointment that all the adults had not banded together to convince my child that he was not a he, but the pit of my stomach welled up into tears, and we entered the elevator with the prescription and follow-up appointment date in hand. There was no preparation or explanation offered as to what to expect once the blockers or T-shots were started. I now had a growing teen boy to feed. The food bill grew as Alex started filling out. The mood swings settled out to just verbal aggression and anger. We were just barely coping through this transition, and I wasn't sure that I'd survive it. So fast forward through the last 5 to 6 years. Alex survived. I survived. Family members started to use the preferred name and pronouns. Gifts were masculine in nature. It became a win-win situation. However, Alex didn't seem whole. He still dealt with mental health issues, and because he had aged out at age 18 from the gender clinic, his medical health wasn't transitioned seamlessly. He then started having to pay for his T-shots, and without a steady job and no extended health benefits to cover them, it became expensive. Alex came to me last March and was in dire straits emotionally. Because I don't have the same thirst for research as Alex, I had to listen to his findings and his feelings. He told me that he shouldn't have been transitioned at all. The way he was transitioned was apparently not completely done according to the medical processes. He now, again, didn't know who he was. This was just as heartbreaking to hear as his initial announcement to become male, because I, along with the medical professionals, had failed my child in so many ways. I allowed my child to be manipulated by adults with their fancy degrees and doctorates, because I hadn't known what questions to ask the doctors, counselors, social workers, and speech therapists. I allowed myself to be manipulated by them. I didn't pursue educating myself with an open mind to help my kid through these very difficult years. So where are we now? I am greatly relieved for Faith that she is comfortable detransitioning. It has been a pleasure to purchase feminine clothing again and watch her blossom as a young woman secure in her gender identity. Listening to her interviews, podcasts, and testimony has been nothing short of admirable. I can say that regardless of the gender presented, I have been proud of the many accomplishments. And now, as Faith speaks out for the safety of today's children, I admire her stand for their rights and their parents. What would I like to have had someone tell me so I could have done things differently? Keep an open mind, heart, and ears that really listen to what your child says. Be less biased and judgmental. Educate yourself through counseling, any available support groups, and printed material. Do more frequent intentional check-ins with your child. Do research into the medical professionals, their standard of care models and process. Additionally, seek second and third opinions from other clinic physicians, social workers, counselors, to ensure they are all giving similar diagnoses. Cultivate a home where open and honest dialogue can take place. Recognize that your child's individuality and opinions may differ from yours, and that's okay. Remember, it's not about me. My child is hurting. What do I need to do to get them through this? Always be proud of your child. Show them your respect. Trust them. Unconditionally love your child. No judgment or harmful criticism. So this sums up the past decade in the aspect of being mom to Faith, then Alex, and the revival of Faith. It was a challenge to wade through my emotions to provide this information to you, but I do hope that some part of it has been helpful to you as parents. My mantra through these years was, this too shall pass. Remember, just like a roller coaster has a starting point, lots of twists and turns, hills and valleys, and even an abrupt and jerky end, it will pass. You get off the ride, stomach in your throat, knees and legs wobbly, and then you realize you have survived.
My name is Faith Burlow. I am currently detransitioning. I am a woman, was born that way, will always stay that way. Um, Even with procedures, I still would have stayed a woman. That would not have changed it either. Um, I always struggled with feeling different and outcasted. Um, and just I had physical health problems as well as mental health problems that made everything worse and harder to deal with. And those weren't being properly addressed. And so as they started fast tracking me, they kind of used the idea that I was suicidal. And the doctors claimed it was because I was gender dysphoric, but that was not entirely the case. That suicidal ideation was there way before I thought I was supposed to be a different gender, but they weren't addressing it that way. They were simply addressing the fact that, oh, well, we think it's because of this, so it's this. And then they took that, weaponized it against my mom, and said, well, if you cared, you wouldn't want them to kill themselves. So obviously we have to give them the drugs because your kid wants them. So obviously they have to have them. But the doctors weren't educated on what the drugs did. Like looking at it now, looking at what puberty blockers actually do, I shouldn't have had them at all because I had already started puberty by the time I went to them. So there was no reason for me to be given puberty blockers, but they were just dumb. And then the fact is, there shouldn't have been a need, even if I were transitioning. They're not safe for kids who are younger than 18. They're not even technically safe for the adults who give them. So to be given something that the doctors are supposed to know aren't safe, but they're giving it to kids anyway, there's no education there. They're being taught something that is completely wrong. It's not evidence-based. It's not ethical by any means. And for them to fast track children on such a dangerous path that as physicians, they should know is dangerous because these are drugs that they're injecting. They should know what they do, right? That's just not the case. They don't know what the drugs do, or they do and they don't care. They're fast tracking children who shouldn't be transitioned at all. There are people I've heard from who transitioned 30 years ago, right? They've been living that life for a very, very long time, longer than I've been alive even. And even they are aware of their biological reality, and they don't argue that. The people who walk around and say, well, trans women are women, that's a completely different branch of this mentality that has nothing to do with reality or biology. And for doctors to be taking that type of ideology and applying it to medicine, and that's how they're treating children, that's ridiculous. There's no need for that at all. And they're not even following their own guidelines that are set in place by the top people, because they didn't. The doctor who transitioned me and diagnosed me, she did not do a proper cognitive assessment. She claims that she did not know I had other mental health issues when she transitioned me. Yet in her notes, in my medical records, it clearly states that she did know. She wrote them down herself. So while being investigated, this physician is lying full on that she didn't know something, even though she did. So she had all of the knowledge prior and still transitioned me incorrectly anyway. Because if she knew that I had all of these underlying mental health conditions, she would have had to have changed the procedure. And she would have had to have halted my transition until she could have done that. And the fact that she just sped me along, again, completely unethical. That's not a doctor at that point. You know, she's got some other thing in mind, and I don't know what her motivation is. I don't really care what the motivation is. The fact is, kids are getting hurt, and the doctors who are supposed to be there to protect them aren't safeguarding them at all. And you can't even tell them to go trust the experts because the experts don't know. You know, they're all completely biased at that point. And until that can be discussed openly and objectively, you're not getting anywhere. And they shouldn't be allowed to do any of this to children because they're children. You know, but right now the government is paying for children to get transitioned. That's where I have a problem, because my insurance was covering all of my medications and all of my transition up until I aged out of it. They would even pay for top surgery, but they won't pay for a reconstruction if I regretted it. They won't pay for feminization surgery now that my voice is deeper. You know, they wouldn't fix any of that if I had made the mistake. But again, if I'm so mentally ill that I can't be diagnosed properly, how in the world am I making these decisions on my own? they're I have no idea what they're doing. And to have somebody tell you, oh, trust the experts, trust the science, they're not following science. So you do have to really go and look into it yourself and look into why you actually want to transition. Because I knew what I was transitioning for. I was running from the fact I was a woman. I didn't like what had happened to me as a woman, and I didn't like the implication of it. And the doctors just didn't care that that was a correlation. They didn't seem to think that that mattered. And they just let me continue on destroying my body. They would have let me cut my breasts off because they approved me for it when I wasn't even 18 yet, which is also not per their own procedure. So all of that experience, the doctors never even handled the transition properly. And now the aftermath of it, where we don't even know everything that's wrong with me or why, because we don't know which drug it was that I took that gave me the problems. That's not fair to put on anybody, you know, and the doctors should know better. And the fact that they don't is just disgraceful. But yeah, that's been mainly my experience, unfortunately, is that the healthcare system has been, they're being used for this very, very much so. And so you do have to be very, very careful, and you have to make sure that you're asking the right questions. And you have to basically do your own research and know what you're going in for and know what you're getting. And you have to look at their own procedures, because if they're going to do anything right, you have to know the correct way for them to do it, because otherwise they just won't. And that's unfortunate, but if you'd like to protect your children, unfortunately, you're going to have to learn how to be doctors too. And it sucks, but that's the state of it, you know. And they pretend like they care about your kids, but honest to God, I haven't seen anyone care about their kids more than a parent, you know. And there are some bad parents out there, absolutely, don't get me wrong, I've seen bad ones, but when you get good ones, you get really, really good ones, you know, and they will do anything in their power. It's just the problem is the people that they're told to take you to as kids is the doctors, and if the doctors lie to your parents, then where do you go from there? But yeah, it was a big confusing mess, and doctors essentially just wanted to kind of get away with it. And I honestly do think that they kind of depended on the fact that I had a dissociative problem and that I had memory issues, because they would pick on the fact that I wouldn't remember all of this. And so how could I be a credible witness if I ever wanted to do anything? And I am planning on taking them, I believe it's court. I was supposed to go through and file for the College of Physicians and Surgeons to file a complaint on the doctor who diagnosed me. I did that, and the college decided not to take any further action. Even though the physician clearly stated that she didn't know that I had other underlying mental health conditions, which as a physician, that's just neglect. You're supposed to be aware of that. But that was apparently an acceptable answer for the college, so they didn't take any further action, and the health committee is the next level up. So I've gone through them, and they should be seeing me this month, I believe. And hopefully I can present them with my medical records and say, hi, this doctor did actually know all of these things. She's lying to you. Can you please fix it? And hopefully they'll look at the procedures and all of that. But again, it's just going to be a very slow road. And then, of course, bringing criminal charges against her, that'll also be a fun thing. But if I can, I will, because this has gone way, way too far, you know, absolutely too far. And there's no need for other children to be hurt the way I have. And I'm one of the lucky ones. Honestly, I will keep saying that, because I didn't have anything cut off. You know, I might still be a bearded lady and have to shave or have a deeper voice, but like I'm still fairly intact. As far as I know, I'm still fertile, but we don't actually know that until later. So I may be sterile, we don't know. But there are people who are definitely sterilized. They are absolutely mutilated and butchered, and they think that this is care. And they defend their physicians, and that's just sick to me. That's not fair at all. So until that stops, I'm sure people will hear more from me. But yeah, thank you very much for having us, for listening.
One of the comments that sticks in my mind from one of the detransitioners that Faith has met in the last little while is kids at age 10 can't choose their bedtime. So why are we going to let them choose their gender? And that really just sticks with me, that, you know, they're not of an age to make these kinds of decisions, and they just go in and say, I'm this, and the doctors have to, so that they don't get, you know, in trouble with human rights and everything else, they have to gender affirm. And I don't agree with that being an appropriate model for our kids being treated. But
That's the problem. It takes about 10 years for people to go through the initial delusion and chasing that high. And then once you get all of the surgeries, get all of the hormones, and now you're left with what you've done, then it takes another like 5 years. So it's 10 total before people are even considering maybe they've made a mistake in trying to detransition. So a lot of the people who are kind of in the midst of it right now, they don't think they're going to detransition because they think that it's fine. But once all of it comes out and they're forced to face it, I mean, it's just going to be one after the other. They're going to come in droves, you know, and it's going to be horrific to see what they've done.
where are our politicians? You know, where are their brains? I know it's
That's just it.
it's
That's where they
all
are. They're getting
everybody-
paid.
I know. They just don't seem to care.
No.
They just don't have any compassion or understanding for what people are going through.
Mhm.
You know, the kids, the teenagers, the parents, the grandparents, the extended family. It hasn't been easy being through this process. I've had to draw the line in the sand with some family members, and it's been tough. They don't understand. They don't choose to understand.
And it's like I can't even imagine to think that you're supposed to trust doctors or therapists and they're going to just take your kids away because you refuse to acknowledge it. That's the other thing. You're not even allowed to question it, or the CAS will come and take your kids. It's like, are you serious? Like, okay, so the one person who's going to love this child more than anyone in the entire world, and you're going to go and take it away because they don't want to inject them with some random stuff that they're not aware of what it's going to do to them. Okay. And that's the thing, it gives them this idea. And even with me, like, I was able to essentially parrot the blackmail that the doctors were saying in the office with mom. And I could just go home and sit. If mom started questioning me, I'm like, well, the doctors say I can. The doctor said I would kill myself otherwise. So what are you doing? You know, and obviously no parent can argue with that. What are you going to say to that?
I was afraid, you know, and you're right. I was absolutely intimidated by that whole system. You know, what could I have done differently? And you're right. There's a lot of things that I couldn't because of the way the system has been created.
No, that's the thing. You're not allowed to question the doctor. They're not even allowed to question themselves. Like they're not even allowed to question each other. You have to understand that the doctors who question the people transitioning children, they get fired.
Yes, I
or
understand
arrested.
that.
So like for a parent to question it, they have you under wraps. They don't care.
To fight this kind of a battle as a single mom working, trying to provide everything, it was taxing and mentally exhausting. But I think through this whole experience, we've both learned a lot, certainly much more than I would have ever wanted to know. It's fantastic that there are organizations now, you know, 10 years too late for me in some ways, but if we can help others, you know, sort through some of these things, we'd both be happy to do so. I know Faith is much better at it than what I am. I'm here to listen and be a shoulder for somebody to cry on. I have no problem doing that because I know what it's like.